Shaelyn and Xander, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your time and your generosity that you're going to share your story with us. I would love to start with saying that I don't have any personal experience that could even come close to what you've been through. So I'm extending my empathy for the feelings that you must have been through. Let me just start by asking, how are you nowadays? How are you feeling?
Every day is still filled with sorrow and regret and apologies mixed with joy and thankfulness. There's moments where we smile and remember, and there's moments where we cry and remember. And it's almost been 2 years.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment. It's a sea of sorrow that we live in, with little islands of joy here and there as we remember the good times and try to hang on to those.
It's additionally difficult to remember the good times because it was so challenging the last few months of his life that finding those good moments is sometimes a battle. So, and he joined partly too because there is a lot of discussion on mothers and their grief, but not so much on fathers as well. And it is different. We're the ones that carry your children, are physically attached to them. But it's a grief as well.
Yeah, and I would be very interested in both of your points of views. So, what, in your own words, what would you like to share about what happened?
We're still working through and trying to figure out what happened. Daniel was a very loved child. We really cherished him and did not take him for granted at all. He was a gift. And when he went through his existential crisis, that was part of what he was questioning, was the whole concept of love. And is love a choice, or do we have to love our children because we're your kids? Is love an option, or is it determined? I don't know where I'm going with this now, but
Do you have an answer to that? Is love a choice?
it is. You don't have to love your children. We might be compelled to in many ways, or care for them, but loving your child, loving anybody, I think is still very much a choice. But Daniel was questioning the entire concept of determinism. Is anything really a choice? Are we predisposed? Are we biologically disposed? Nature versus nurture. How much does nature play into? And a lot of people celebrate the fact that we're naturally born this way, or nature has developed us this way, and we're proud of our heritage and proud of who we belong to. But for Daniel, a lot of those questions was, then who am I? Because I had no choice in many of these things. And that whole philosophical idea of determinism. So therefore, if there's no choosing, if everything is determined, then love, which was the biggest issue for him and for us to deal with, since he knew and he was very aware that he grew up in a caring family, would we choose to love him again if we had a choice in his eyes? And it wasn't like he necessarily made any definitive, had any resolution to that, because it was tearing him apart. And in the end, he just crashed and stopped asking questions. So he just burnt out. which is partly attributed to his death. It's something I think a lot of people take for granted, and we were forced to not take that for granted and to see it from an entirely different perspective or different eyes and ask different questions. And so much so that we couldn't do things like say, I love you, because he questioned the reality of love. And as parents who loved our son deeply, and he really did love us too, having that reality questioned was heartbreaking. And all of that really ate up his body and made him really vulnerable, as well as a few other battles that went with it, made him vulnerable to, he was physically weak. I like to say that our bodies reflect the battles we fight. And he was living testimony of that. And I want people to know that Daniel was precious. He was loved. He is not to blame. But as to where we are and what we want, we're still trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, it's hard for each of us to deal with individually and as a couple, because it's so complicated what really happened and how to explain it, and there's no easy answers. We had 17 amazing years with him, and the last year was a journey that became very, very difficult as he went through this crisis with himself and with us. And definitely the hardest times of all of our lives, trying to figure that out and work through it together. And the regrets that we feel every day are different for each of us, but it's impossible not to think back and think of those loops of that last year and different decisions and different things that happened, and wish, oh, if we had done this or that, or if we had gotten more help, maybe things could have been different. And maybe they could have, but maybe those are the dark loops that your mind can go to and we'll never know the answers to.
People tell you not to look back, but the thing is, if you don't learn the truth, and you can't prevent the future. It's like a lot of times what they say with the war, if you don't remember the past, then you can repeat it. And it's the same thing with Daniel. I think there was a lot, and a lot of people were a part of his story in the end. There's a lot of various components where everyone could learn something, or we needed to reevaluate as a result of their interaction with him. But yes, love is a choice, I think.
And did he ever say why he started questioning love and the determinism behind it?
Well, that's partly what I have delved into, is I can basically pinpoint exactly where things began, and he does too, in his journals. And that's part of the second half of what I respond to in my collection, is his journals as well. And so a lot of it began with a pandemic. You know, he was in high school, and he's a scientist and a musician and an athlete, but he's very much, his gift and his passion was natural sciences, biology, and living sustainably, caring for the world and each other. And he saw that all kind of in an impressionable age. 10th grade, I think it was in, is when he saw those that were taught to put our faith in. He lost faith in them. And so he was already questioning the truth of what people say, matching with their actions. He calls it the question or the conversation. And that sparked his deeper introspective thinking. It sparked him questioning everything that he was taught to the next level, besides the pandemic, and seeing those, the institutions and the people, including teachers and parents and friends and the police and the government and everyone else reacting more towards a I concept versus a me concept, a we are collective concept. That was the next step, was that conversation that he had that sparked more of a delving into the deterministic philosophy. And unbeknownst to me, well, we knew he was questioning. We saw the progression in the fall, but we can pretty much pinpoint those two events to the spark of it.
How did you navigate this questioning period?
He shared. He was Daniel was such a good kid. He was such a relaxed kid. He was a very open kid in many respects, up to a point. I mean, he would share things that were on his heart and mind, but he didn't share. Part of our problem was he would share aspects with me, and he would share aspects with my husband, and we didn't cross over on those shares. And so we didn't really realize, and he shared with teachers. He had a couple of teachers that he trusted, that he would ask questions about. He was very curious. It all started more as a curiosity, as an interest, as a what about this and what about that? And he just wanted to know more because he was so thirsty for knowledge. He was a very intelligent kid. He was what we call here in the US a gifted child. And he just would soak up and seek information and truth and knowledge. And that's how it began. And so part of it was he had different people that he would share with and ask questions about. It was always more of a asking questions. What do you think of this, with his grandparents and teachers? And he started reaching out to other professors and other schools. He was taking college level classes and then getting to know other professors because of his interests. And that was neat. That was cool. That was, okay, he's on a journey and let's encourage him on his journey. And we knew and let him know and assured him we loved him. And no matter where he ended up on his journey, he was loved. He didn't have to agree with us. He didn't have to believe what we believed. He didn't have to think what we thought. We just, wherever you go, we'll be there, and we love you and we want to support you. So we did. He's very aware when he goes down into what he calls the tunnel and he can't come out. He's very aware of he lost himself along the way in this. And, for being parents who supported him in this journey, we didn't see when it became dangerous soon enough. And that was our mistake.
You mentioned that he shared different things with your view. What were the differences?
With me, it was more things having to do with literature or school, personal struggles that he might be struggling with, or temptations. He's a teen boy, or things that he thinks are temptations, but are they really? Just all kinds of inviting me into his personal struggles. I think this is what I believe. Like, well, if you do, then, that's fine. Here's other things to consider or whatever. I don't know what he and my husband, because of the pandemic, would do a lot of, I don't do a lot physically outdoors, but he and my husband would do a lot of adventure trips. And that's where he would share often with you, right? Like in car rides and so on.
Yeah, he was in his senior year of high school, his last year during this time on his journey, he would bring theological and spiritual questions that he'd talk about with me. Philosophical questions, working through how he was raised and what we believe. And
again, that no choice in that.
Yeah, what is really real and what isn't real. And one thing led to another. And he just kept going down this dark hole of questioning everything until a breaking point. But he looked at it scientifically, spiritually, theologically, philosophically, and all of those at the highest level. He was extremely brilliant and gifted. So he was reading stuff that was going over my head in terms of all of those topics.
And my head too. And I think that was, go ahead.
So it was, I, at some level, knew he was, dealing with this at a very difficult and existential level, but none of us realized that it would reach this breaking point for him and he would go over the edge. It was an attitude that we had that was, we'll keep working on this. We'll work it out over time. And unfortunately, we couldn't work it out over time. It did reach a breaking point. So that's a little bit of the story, but he did open up. But as the journey progressed, I think he talked less and less. And that, I think, is the saddest part too, because I think he
talked less and less to us.
He talked less and less to anybody because he was very isolated. And that's coming out of the pandemic, that didn't help. And that's one of the regrets. We wish we'd gotten other people to help and that he had a bigger network.
I'm going to step in there a minute, and I disagree, because that's when he started reaching out to other people. That's where we have his letters and emails where he's reaching out and approaching other professors in other universities he does the research based on the questions that he has. That's when he reached out to this other mystic that he found. That's when he reached out to his other relatives. He was reaching everyone else. He was not sharing as much with us. He was searching more from other people. And that I was unaware of. Part of that too, though, is we didn't discourage that either, or we wouldn't have, because to some degree, because I was like Xander, where he had surpassed us basically by the time he was in 9th grade intellectually. And I knew like the basis of the stuff that he was questioning and asking about, but not to the depth that he was. We learned later that he was more of a doctoral level when it came to the ability to understand certain concepts, or at least ask the concepts. But he's caught in this trap of, he may be very intelligent, and he was what everyone would always call an old soul. He just had that wisdom and understanding, but he was still developmentally in a kid's body. Men's brains don't fully finish developing until they're around 21. So he still had all the teen angst and the teen hormones and the teen growth during this time as well. And so he talked to us less and less and reached out to others more and more during that time. We learn later.
He obviously approached it from a very academic, very scientific point of view. How did his feelings and behavior change during this time?
He became more weepy because it hurt him. He was recognizing, he was very aware that he lost his innocence. He was very aware of what he lost, this family connection, the comfort, the love that he grew up with, the not support. He knew he didn't lose that, I think, but he lost the security that all is going to be okay. Mom and Dad can take care of everything. The world is going to be okay, or it will be okay, or I will be okay. Because of what he was questioning, he lost that security, and he mourned that loss. He mourned the loss of how it used to be, because like he says, he had blinders taken off, and he wishes that he didn't. He wishes he never went down that path. He wishes that he never stepped over that line. He wishes that he didn't know, and he wishes that he didn't have those questions because of what he lost. He was so aware of what he lost in his family connection, in And it was through no fault of his own or ours. It was just because of the journey he was on that forced us basically into a type of really weird estrangement. And it really hurt him. And he would cry out, it hurts, it hurts. And he would just become tearful. And when that first started, we would do things like, I would just take his hand and look at him and say, no matter what you question, know this, never doubt, we love you. You are loved. That you could always count on. And that carried him through for quite a while in the fall. And he would remind himself, I know I am loved. I know I am loved. But after a while, that was not enough. And then, just nothing out. And that was just how it would be. He would cry. We would hold him, let him know he was loved. And then when it came to a head, that no longer worked. Yeah.
He kept him in the fall. He kept himself extremely busy.
Yeah.
To avoid, at some level, dealing with these unanswerable problems and questions.
Yeah.
So that was something that was amazing too. I mean, the amount he did in his short life is unbelievable.
Yeah. So he was becoming an insomniac too, because he didn't want to let those thoughts overcome and overwhelm him. And we can see when they did.
I feel like clarifying, because we haven't said that out loud, that he did not take his own life. So that was not a choice. That was not his choice. Something much more mysterious happened.
Yes, but he did try. And this is where it's like we feel like we lost our son twice. Because, and I don't know how serious of an intent it was, so to speak, but I don't think it started off that way. When our daughter was studying in Europe, and I came back, and didn't know that he had some bad days. And I was really tired. And the day after, we had an argument, and it came to a head, and we called the police. And I shouldn't have done that. And they came, and it was just like, because he was a risk of running away. He's also at this stage which makes it really difficult for parents to actively provide love needed, and the ability that society gives us, is that he was at this point where he is part kid, part adult. And so some kid rules still apply to him, while other adult rules now apply to him. So he was caught within this kid-adult decision-making. So the police were called, and then he was at risk of running away. That's what he wanted to do. And I was worried, and Xander was worried, and we kept an eye on him, and we again made a mistake. We had a psychology friend lined up who was going to see him a couple days later, and we thought we'd just hold on till then. But the next day, Daniel ran for the berries. He's a botanist. He knows his plants. And Xander caught him and just carried him completely limp. And we put him in the car home, and he wanted to run. He's a cross-country runner, and he's very long legs. He's like a praying mantis with his long legs just all over the place. Very tall, skinny praying mantis type kid who runs, and he would run whenever he got anxious or overwhelmed. And running for him was a lifestyle. It was a part of him. We made mistakes. We misinterpreted in our heightened fear for our son, and not understanding and just reacting. A big thing for him too was when we react, We're not choosing. Actions are choices. Reactions are reactionary. And called 911 again, and the police came, and he was admitted to a psych ward for 3 days. But then he refused to leave until we had agreed to his term. So he ended up staying 5 days. So no, yeah, he did not take his own life. That's not how he died. He was questioning that the one choice that you do have is whether to take your life. It was not a desperation. It was, or a mental illness in that sense. It was, if you're questioning the reality of everything and whether things are determined, then the one area that you have, if you are born, because you don't get that choice either, is whether you can choose to die or not. And that was something that he was on that realm. That's where he was at that point in time, was the choice whether to, if that's the only choice that exists, then maybe I'll choose to do that. Which also, I don't think a lot of people necessarily know this kind of stuff. It just ate him alive. He did not like that. He really fought against that and didn't like it. But then those several months he went through, he had this form of living that he wanted to live. He's also very much into saving the planet, living sustainably. His whole goal in life was to live as invasively as possible. And he had all these plans for when he had his own place in his own life. And he decided he wasn't going to wait anymore. And we just couldn't keep up. We basically couldn't keep up with everything or understand everything. And we were living in fear at this point too, all the time. So he withdrew more and more and more and more. And so that became painful to even enter the house. He would exit through the window. He just got further and further and further away from us. And that basically made him extremely vulnerable physically. But yeah, no, he did not take his life.
How is your relationship with grief now? Where are you on that journey?
That's a very difficult question to answer in
Good question.
any specific way. I think it's constantly changing, but always there. The highs and the lows continue sporadically, and you don't know when grief is going to hit you especially hard for different moments, and they can be good and bad moments. Sometimes it's celebrating a really special moment and having those happy thoughts, and then other times it can be a happy moment that triggers all of the sad thoughts and regrets and wondering why and what am I doing and how should I live now. So it's a daily journey of ups and downs. We have cultivated some ways as a couple to remember Daniel, and one of those things is on the 29th of each month. We call it Daniel's Day, and that's the day, the 29th of June is when he passed away. So on the 29th of each month, we take a special day to remember him, and that can involve eating a meal that was his favorite meal, or that Shaelyn will make, or reflecting on some of his earlier years through photo albums and things like that. So that's something that we've purposefully planned into our living as a way to deal with it and not forget it, but also consciously reflect on it as a couple together on that day. But we do different things individually as well. Last year on April 29, I did the date worked out for me to do a big ultra marathon race on that very specific day in Anza State Park, which was a really special spiritual place for Daniel and I. I had visited with our family as well as with Dana and Daniel, and then
Our daughter.
Both our kids. And then with Daniel, I took several trips with just him there. So it was a special day to do an extraordinary event and remember him. And so those are a few things.
It's with those, that for us is important. We also, during that time, go through, see, the thing is grief is complicated for us. It's I guess it's been termed traumatic grief. Daniel, he reset. So he went back and worked on a farm for a while, or he just went away. We got to a point where he needed to be away from his parents, which we understood. It was painful, and it pained him, but we got to that point. And he had reset, and he came back. But it was like building from scratch a relationship. And he called himself a sapling. He was like a sapling that was cut down, and he is now regrowing. But he was also very afraid of any reactions on our part, because we had reacted so often in fear. That was detrimental to him. And it was a very careful 6 weeks of rebuilding, renewing, for someone who was also just completely exhausted. And we started to hear him laugh, and he would share, and he would hug us, and we would do things together as a family. Forge, he loved to forge, and it was something where we learned to let him lead. And so he would come in, and we developed these new routines, so to speak. Like in the morning, he would join us for tea from his own concoction that he would ferment and everything else. But he was very deliberate. And during this point of rebuilding, we had to let him lead. We couldn't reach out and hug him, but he could reach out and hug us, and he would make a point of doing that. And so it was excruciatingly painful to hold ourselves back, let him lead on that, like not saying the word love and so on. But we saw this renewal, we saw this building, and we knew that he was coming back, that he was finding his way through. We had a lot of hope. It was such a hopeful time period. He had gone through hell and back, mentally, internally, and was coming through. And he went off to visit and work on a dream job that he had. His old Daniel, his old self, was coming through, just more mature and different. And that didn't work out. Another hope dashed. And he went to visit his sister. They were going to vacation together. She was studying in the Netherlands then. And that's where he died. And that's where he's buried. So we here in the US, and we have to have these times set apart to help us through our grief, because we don't have the ability to go visit our son's grave whenever we want. We don't have the ability to do that kind of aspect that many people might find comforting in their grief. I would find it comforting. We all react in different ways. So we do things like have Daniel's Day. That's kind of our way of visiting him. And another way that we work through our grief is when Daniel was in 9th grade, he wrote a proposal to his school. He saw a whole slope that had nothing growing on it, a huge slope that went alongside the high school. And he wrote a proposal. He founded the Wildlife Conservation Club, and he wrote this whole proposal and said, I'd like to plant all native plants here. Here's why we need native plants. Here's what I could do with it, and so on. And they agreed. And so this is completely empty. Started this whole native plant society and wildlife conservation, and planted all native plants. And he started this club, and he would propagate native plants that he would gather from his trips and so on. And he planted over 300 native plants. And they're all growing and thriving. And so every month we also work his slope. And sometimes others join us in working his slope. And we do things like that because we can't see where he's buried and visit him that way. So our working through grief has been partly working through it twice, because we had such renewal and hope, and he was coming out of it. And then it was completely dashed again within a month of him physically dying. He was mentally and emotionally and philosophically and theologically and all existentially. Healing, building, coming out of it, and had renewal. Just the taste of it was starting, and it was his sapling, the sapling coming up, and then he got raced to the ground. He died, and no one was expecting that. It shocked the doctors. And they ran out of time. They were running up the tests on him and ran out of time. So dealing with grief is dealing with dashed hope twice. And like Xander said, we do things together, and we go through it on our own as well.
Do you find it easier to keep the memory alive and revisit, or to distance, or is there a mixture?
Revisit. It's not easier. I would say it would be easier to just distance, but my son would never want that, and he deserves us to remember him, and he deserves to be loved. A friend of mine said grief is love with no place to go, and that's true. It's more painful to revisit. It's not easier, but it's what I choose to do because I need to, for my sake, but also for his sake. Because when you lose your child, it's a part of you that's lost, and you aren't whole without them anymore. Kind of like phantom pains and so, but I need to do that to keep him close to me. I don't want to lose him any more than I already have. So though it's difficult and pain-filled, I keep him close. But you?
I would echo the same sentiment. I want to keep him close, and it is difficult, and I cry regularly. But he was just so special, and I'm so thankful for the years I did have with him. He changed our lives for the better, and will hang on to that forever and not let it go. So distancing it is not, it's not something I'm certainly thinking about or planning. It's more keeping him close, and the pain that comes with that will come and go as we remember the good times and the bad times and the regrets. But there is so much goodness and joy and love in the relationship we had with him for 18 years that I will hang on to forever. And it's special to be able to get to talk to him, I do talk to him sometimes. Even now I talk to him regularly, but to talk to other people, to share his stories, to share the good memories, to share the special things he did and became, and the person he was, and the things he pursued and was passionate about, to be able to continue sharing those stories and sharing his passions and things that were important to him, that became really important to me as well.
It's a battle to not have 3 months of, it's amazing to me how 3 months of hell can overwhelm 18 years of joy. And it's really difficult to not let that consume and overtake. And so it's important to find those, to move through that, and so that we can remember all the good. Because it's not like it was so terrible in the sense that he wasn't battling what physical, it just what he was battling was so challenging to be a part of it, and affected our family unit so much because of what he was really challenging, that it was just, you don't anticipate this as a parent. You know that there can be health issues. You know all the things that can happen in society. You know there's violence. You know there's all the stuff that you fear naturally as a mother. And the one thing that you don't expect is what happened. I wasn't prepared for that. And love wasn't enough. It didn't save him. I think that's the hardest part to grieve, is the fact that our love as parents did not protect him, did not help him, it did not save him. It wasn't enough.
As
Oh, he loved.
as a family unit, how are you moving on now, or how are you functioning now?
By remembering Daniel, because it affects our daughter as well. She was very close to her brother, in terms of how siblings can be. Came out to see her, but he chose to work there because she was there. That was a plan they had for a long time. We just connect with each other every morning, and we just try and get through every day.
Yeah, I think some of the things we already talked about, like on the 29th of the month, trying to set that day as a special day. And then maybe some special events here and there, but those are the main things.
Yeah. And planting, when he left to work in the Netherlands, for example, he surprised us. He gave Xander, he's just a master when it comes to plants. So he had been growing secretly a peach tree that he propagated and a pepper plant that he propagated for Xander and I. So before he left, he, revealed his gift to us, that he had a peach tree growing and a pepper plant. And so we do things like, and we moved up back to our old place after we left. We had moved down to where our kids were at school, so there was less commuting. And then my husband was the one who commuted instead. So we do things like keep his plants alive. We see sunflowers that he loved to grow, and we plant sunflowers. And it's those times that help us move forward as a family, help us get through each day. And we just, perspective on life changes. So we don't do things that we would have done in the past, but we just try and heal together and be with each other. Our daughter's living back with us right now, just looking for work here in LA. And I think some of it's just trying to not tightrope walk, but more of a, we don't know where we're going with this. Let's just be by each other. Let's just be by each other.
As a couple, you mentioned that you might be dealing with it differently. How do you support each other through the times when you need something different, when you are dealing with things differently?
Well, when Xander says he needs to go for a run and do something that, or if he needs to go for a hike, and I know that that's a hike that he did with Daniel, and he needs to go talk to Daniel or something like that, and I'm like, yeah, go do that. I need to see Daniel's grave. So even though it's a challenge for us to do so, we are going to see his grave again. It's our second time now. That means a trip to the Netherlands, and that requires a lot, but I need to do that. I don't know if he does. So it's certain things like that. And then also talking more, listening to each other more, trying to understand each other more, because we communicate differently.
It's hard.
It's hard.
It's really hard.
I know that statistically, a lot of couples don't stay together after the death of a child, and we're working hard to do so. Because we have a few things in common, unfortunately, which was we did different mistakes, but we made mistakes together in terms of the end, and we raised our son and we have our daughter, and I think our grief is there's a mutuality in part of it.
If you even have thought about it, if you look 5 years into the future or 10 years into the future, what do you see?
I don't look into the future anymore. Thankful for every day. But I see, the one thing I see is, I see our daughter. I see my husband and I wherever we are, but I see us together at somehow, whether it's physically together or whatever, together somehow.
Yeah, I think I would say something similar. I don't feel I can look into the future. And it's hard to, I think one of the hard realities is just imagining another 50 years without Daniel.
Yeah, you don't want to think.
I don't want to think about that, because every day is hard. And to imagine I just got to keep living like this for that many years is depressing in and of itself, in an already depressing situation. So I don't think too much about that. Just, I'm trying to think about our current family and what we can do to keep us going in good ways, in healthy ways, despite this in line or in view of this tragedy that we've gone through together and the trauma we've gone through, so that we can, thinking proactively about what we can do as a family to both work through it, but also to live together in positive ways.
The only thing I can think of in the future each time is looking forward to seeing him and visiting him in the Netherlands. It's the only thing in the future that is on my radar. Otherwise, like you said, to think of the future is to imagine him not being there, and it's too painful to not, because every event now, every Christmas, every birthday, anything happening with our daughter or my husband or any event, there's someone absent. Even my in-laws and parents were out for an event for Daniel. He was a film composer. He composed a lot of my daughter's short films when he was in high school. And a festival here began a Daniel Koops Emerging Composer Award. So family all came out. And we all went out for breakfast. And there was 11 of us, and it was a 12-person seat. And I just kept thinking, there's an empty seat. He belongs there. He should be there. That's Daniel's seat, and Daniel's not there. And that's how every day is. So you have, for everything that happens in life, there is a missing person. There's a missing component. There's a missing family member. And so any event that is supposed to be, or traditionally you think of as being joyful, is now, my daughter likes to use the word bittersweet. Because as much as there is joy in that, there is always a bit of sorrow because someone's missing. Whether you don't expect your child when they get older to be at every event or anything, but there still would be like a phone call or an acknowledgement or hey, let me be missing you, or there's still that presence. Now you hear the logo. There's still the footprint. His physical presence on this earth would still exist. And that absence is glaring anytime there is something worthy of celebration that he should at some point either hear or be a part of.
Have you found anything, any routine, any ritual, anything that makes it easier, that takes off that pressure?
No, but I think doing the celebration on the 29th is one way to regularly deal or have it be something that we plan, so it's not always random ups and downs, but that we have that time. That is something special.
I do. I have what I call a tea with Daniel every day, and it's where I take a cup of tea, and I'll either look through albums or watch his videos or listen to his music that he wrote or play. And it's not too long, so I don't get overwhelmed. But it's enough for me. That's a large mug of tea, and when I'm done with my mug, then I'm done with my tea with Daniel. And so I connect with him that way every day, and that helps. And I make point to alternate between like listening to his voice or seeing him when he was younger, things like that, and just to help me get through the intensity of the final months. But I do have tea with Daniel every day. And walks. We walk together. We go to the farmer's market together. We do more together than we used to in terms of being just in the moment.
Good.
And appreciating things. So we go to the farmer's market. Oh, Daniel would have liked that, or he would have gone for this, or our lifestyle has changed as a result of him, of his passion, our priorities. So it's connecting not always in conscionable ways, but just naturally, because of the influence that he had on us. It's more subconscious in many ways.
Working on taking care of his native plant slope is another really healthy, uplifting, but sometimes sad thing for me. I'll cry on the slope, but being able to go pull the weeds and invasive plants off that slope is a really important thing to both of us. Individually, I think I don't have as much planned stuff, but there are places I like to go that were special with us, or places like that where the frogs are croaking or the crickets are humming, because he loved to be in nature, and connecting in nature is really something for me that's been part of my therapy. And then also another unique thing was he was very interested in studying indigenous cultures, and one of the many things he did was make flutes. Yeah. And he made me a flute that was in the style of the local people here, the Tongva people, and they made their flutes from a local wood, which is the elderberry wood. And elderberries are all over the world, but the local variety here is one that was special and honored to the Tongva people, and it happens to be really good for flutes because the inner pith of the branch can be pushed out.
He's a music professor too.
Yeah, my job is teaching music. So Daniel was making lots of flutes, and he made matching flutes for us to play in the style of the Tongva people as he was studying that culture and their plants and ways of living. So I do keep up playing that flute once in a while. I don't play it every day, but I do pull it out pretty regularly. And that's another special way to just connect with him. I also ride his bike almost every day. And so I feel like I'm riding with him. He's riding with me in spirit as I use his bike and keep that going. And the running has been a part of my therapy too, but also to feel like I can invite him to run with me and have his spirit going with me. Sometimes we connect through nature too. Like when we see butterflies, it's always something really special when I think of Daniel. Monarchs in particular, but other animals too. We have a hawk that lives nearby, and it's a red-tailed hawk that I feel has captured Daniel's spirit and reminds us of him.
That's the thing, is it's hard to move forward because every time we see something, Daniel was so connected to the natural world that we see Daniel anytime we step outside. The hawks to the butterflies, and we know that he would be able to tell us the the Latin name, the scientific name, its purpose, its uses, its history, and whether it's a red-tailed hawk or the elderberry bush that, you know, we go hiking, or so it's really, you cannot ignore and you cannot distance ourselves, even if we wanted to, because all we have to do is step outside and we just see remnants of him everywhere in many ways. And sometimes it's joyful and sometimes it's sorrowful, but like the monarch butterflies that Xander talked about, that really became special because there's a story with that. And there's a story with so many things. So the monarch butterflies, one of the issues that sparked another realm of questions when he was the fall of his senior year was that the DNA of the butterfly is really not that much more different than ours. And there was something about the butterfly that really made him stop and think. And his biology teacher noticed that. We learned later, too, that his teachers also were provided some information and didn't share. Like the fact that he was questioning life and death. That part I was not shared. He would share different aspects with different people. And there was no alarm raised. So there's some issues there. But the butterfly started with that. And then when Daniel had reset and he came home, he would ask if Mom would be willing to come outside, interested in coming outside. So I would sit outside and sit on the porch or on a stoop while he worked in the garden. And there were so many cocoons at this time when he had reset. And there were monarchs flying everywhere and just hatching, and certain things in our yard we didn't move, or like wagons and trash cans, because there were cocoons and they would hatch. And he would silently just point at a monarch and we would watch it, or I would see one and I would indicate to him, and we would just have these moments in the evenings where we were watching the monarchs. And he grew milkweed, which is specific food for the monarchs. And so we had evenings of monarch watching. And so when he passed, well, the birds were singing their morning wake-up song. And we walked through the woods and saw the butterflies. And so they become precious to us. And those things are very organically done. It's difficult. I'm glad we have that, because it's difficult for people to understand when you think of trauma, when you think of grief, what often comes to people's minds. It's definitely not what we went through. And there is some lack of understanding or a lack of awareness that it doesn't have to be something menacing or medical for it to be traumatic and life-changing, altering and devastating, and can kill. We think of Daniel as a testament to the fact that it's not always that way.
Have you been able to find any support from friends and extended family?
I feel I've got a lot of diverse friends and family that have been very supportive and are walking this journey with me. And I'm very thankful for that. It's a difficult journey, and it's hard to do alone. So I'm very thankful for my friends and family that have walked through it, and to walk through it with my own family too, with Shaelyn and Dana.
There's my grandparents, they're grieving too. And it's grandparent grief, but friends, Daniel made a mark on so many people. And so they all rallied together, in ways that they knew Daniel. So Xander has his running buddies that ran with Daniel, and they would do their activities. And so they get together and they remember Daniel, and Xander's there. And then my daughter and I will do certain things too, or Xander, it's all doing what we used to do that Daniel used to be a part of. And that's how they've been really supportive.
And if you could go back and could ask for a different kind of support when you felt like that they are putting so much pressure on you, what would have helped you? In what ways they could have helped in times when you just felt that they are just pressuring you?
The biggest help would be to believe and trust the medical professionals. So we don't need to. So if we had support as parents, we would have been better able to support our son. That is for sure. So instead of giving us all of your spiels about, we think it's this, or have you heard of this, or have you heard of that? It's, hey, do you think we could bring a meal over? Or what can we do to help? Instead of telling us that this is what they think it is, it's a simple question. How can we help you? Is there anything we can do for help? You might not want it right now, or you might not know, but check in with us as parents so that we can be there for our son. And I think that is one of the faults we learned within the system here, is when your child is going through something, you are going through it as a family. And if we're the ones that are the main support system right now, we could really use your support. You're not helping at all by having your own theories and insisting on those. Because I would have loved to have literature on what he was experiencing. We had asked, even within the counseling system, there was an issue with that too. Can you help us? What can we do? How can we help? What is this? It was more of a fighting for the fact that this is what he's going through. And I'm now finding literature. Why is there not a session with the parents on how can you support what you can do? It was all focused on post-suicide, which is seriously lacking in our society too. Is the fact that we have so much information on what to do and preparing or helping in the moment. But what about when they come back? How do they re-enter society? How can you help your son with that? And that was the thing I think that really, in a sense, made Daniel's crisis worse, because if he had gone back to school right away, I think instead of maybe in a week or two, and then it just kept getting drawn out and it kept getting harder and harder and harder. If he had been accepted back, if he had been offered back, if we had encouraged him to go back, I think it would have helped. He would have been seeing his friends. He would have been staying busy. One of the mistakes we made is by staving off all of these assumptions and prejudices and misunderstandings, and this is what he has when no one's trusting the professionals. Even school did not trust the professionals. It isolated him more. It made him worse. And that's when he really went down the tunnel. The tunnel did not start until everything else was cut off because of how the community reacted. So if we could change anything, it would be, can you please walk alongside us instead of trying to force us down paths that don't exist? And I really think that was Daniel's biggest battle before he left for the Netherlands, was the right to come back and graduate.
What was the school's excuse? Why didn't they want to take him back?
I met with them, and their main reason was that it would distract the students to see Daniel back. They didn't want to distract him. This is 4 weeks before the exams, so they have perfectly enough time because he had talked about maybe going back to a class or two, or doing some of his labs after school, etc. But then this whole battle came, and none of that was even appetizing to him either, because he had to fight for the right to take his exams. And he did lose that right to do so. They said no. And there was nothing that I could do anymore. And he had shaven, he cut his hair, he was excited to come back. He was preparing initially to come back to at least one, if not two classes. And that desire was completely shot down when they said, hey, no, you can't do that. for no other reason. And I just couldn't. These are people who knew Daniel since kindergarten. They're the ones that gave him the slope to work on. They're the ones that would, teachers would come and sit with him and eat lunch. They're the ones that he helped with. He went above and beyond. He couldn't fathom that. And so then you have all those questions that he was wondering again, is those that are supposed to love and support you when you need them most did not. And therefore you have the question of love.
Yeah, I don't want to assign blame, but it does sound like that at a time when he is having these very deep existential questions, having to deal with something like this does underline the question of choice, whether he had a choice, whether he had a say in this.
Exactly. If he's 18, he should be allowed to make some of his own choices.
You did mention literature that you found since that was helpful. What were those, some of those?
Just looking up existential crisis and gifted teens and what to look out for, what to expect, how to be a parent and how to support them and how to not go down what Daniel would call the rabbit hole. Because that's the big question, is where's that line crossed, where you have the curiosity and the interest and the existentialism. When does it become a crisis? And it's so being able to recognize signs and symptoms ahead of time and knowing what to do with it so that it doesn't become a crisis and it doesn't cross that line. So there's literature, there's a lot of YouTube, there's a lot of articles written that I've been finding more on. And I really wish I had that from the beginning. I wish I had known. Because then we would have been able to also handle his existential crisis was manifested in a very unique way, which is what threw everyone off, which it really shouldn't have. It threw me off too, in a sense, because it was still very much Daniel. He just decided that he wasn't going to wait any longer, where like he would only eat food that was local, sustainable. And depending on where he was in his tunnel, depended on the radius of what local meant to him. And that really shouldn't have been that surprising to us. And I should have been able to adapt better to that and quicker. If I had just known more about what the root is, and then you can handle all you can better handle the individualistic ways that they go through their crisis and how it's manifested.
What would you say now? Where is that line between questioning and crisis?
I think the first time that he started becoming weepy, and that's where we should have at least sought help for him, or suggested that he talk to somebody else, brought someone else on board, or directly reached out. And that's where teachers should have been also, when they first started, like one teacher had confronted Daniel. We learned this later in his concept of suicide, or a concept of life and death, and what's real and what's not. It was hard for all of us to find that line. And you knew that the teacher, also being Daniel was so inquisitive that it was very, very hard to find that. But I think when he started becoming weepy and more of an insomniac, I think that's where we should have been more proactive. And that's where the crisis, I think that's where the danger of it becoming a crisis really reveals itself. If you don't nip it in the bud now, it could go wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's the regrets, that we missed those clues of it becoming a crisis, and we're thinking, oh, somehow we'll work it out.
He'll work it out.
and it was a crisis that needed help.
Eventually, what caused his death?
He had ulcers and one perforated, and he expired in the hospital.
We did not know it was the ulcers at the time, but he was in the hospital for 3 days, getting tested for different things and very weak.
He checked himself in with our daughter.
He wasn't doing well, and they were testing things. And on the third day, he vomited, and on the second day he vomited, and the vomit went on his lungs, and he passed out and went into crisis mode, and then died.
Yeah. So when he was woofing on the farm in the Netherlands, he noticed some spots on his belly, and we should backtrack a little bit. So Daniel was a cross-country runner, and he was quite good, but he had a lot of his senior year. He never made his PR, and it was a devastating ending for him because he had such knee pain. I mean, this kid is 6'3", and he's still growing, and he's estimated to get to 6'8". He's still growing, so he's like this thin weed. And I always said that as soon as he stopped growing up, he would start to grow out. But he had such knee pain, and it was really making it difficult for him to work and to garden and so on. So he was kind of worried about working on a woofing farm. So he went to see the doctor. He checked himself in, even though he was not wanting to be back in hospitals at all. And they gave him pain medication, which he didn't want to take. It was like a last resort thing. So we picked them up for him, and he did take them with him. It was the last resort. He gets to the farm in the Netherlands, and he sees some spots, and he's not too worried about it yet, but he's really in a lot of pain. So when he sees his sister, he shows her, she lets me know, because during this time, part of our grief and trauma is the fact that part of the plan was that we would not initiate anything. Any communications would have to be initiated by him. So our daughter let us know. And finally, he then communicated with us and said, should I bring myself in? And they're in a small town. Everything's closed. It's the weekend. So the clinic nearby is completely closed until Monday. And we said, yeah, you should go in. Because he had swollen ankles and those spots. So he's like, well, can I wait until tomorrow? It's late at night. Can I wait till tomorrow? I said, yeah, just wait till tomorrow, but make sure you bring yourself in. So they take the hour-and-a-half train ride to the main city where the hospital is, and he checks himself in, and he begins to vomit, and just little bits over time, I guess. And they are, like Xander said, running a bunch of tests. They're checking for everything because he's looking very malnourished. He's lost a lot of weight, has nothing on him, and they're trying to figure out why. And so they keep testing and testing, and the doctor has the consultation meeting with our daughter, and we had said, ask him, because we're here in the U.S., is he at risk of dying? And he says, doctor said, no, we don't have any concern about that right now. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. And they moved Daniel to his own room. He was out of the intensive care or the emergency service and into his own place, and where they have a kitchen. And so our daughter was able to bring him food and keep it in the fridge. And he went to get some food from the kitchen, and apparently he collapsed and he vomited and passed out, and he inhaled his own vomit. So he expired, and it took them, was it 40 minutes, 30 minutes? It revived him. But they think his brain was probably damaged due to a lack of oxygen. And they kept him alive long enough for, I was there. I made it in time, but Xander was flying to the Netherlands. And when they decided that it would be cool to keep him alive, we had asked, can you please keep him alive until Xander gets there? They said, no, it'd be too painful for him, too cruel for him. So they let him go. We let him go. And they didn't want to do an autopsy. They just thought that he just died from malnourishment. But I knew that there had to be a reason for it. And all the tests, they were still waiting back from certain tests too. I mean, it surprised them. They had tested them, they were waiting back, and those all came out negative. Everything came out negative. And the only thing that he was low on was iron. I think, right? I think it was just iron. And like it's malnourishment. They knew that, they had assessed him and everything, and they were still trying to figure out why, but not enough where let's ask more questions. So I asked for an autopsy, and they were not on board with that. They said, we can do that if you want. It's up to you. We don't recommend it. And I said, well, if he was your child, what would you do? And I said, we would do an autopsy. We would like an autopsy. So when they did that, we had a meeting with the doctors later on because they were completely shocked to learn that his body had a bunch of ulcers and one had perforated. It went through his liver, and it kind of stuck his liver and his other organs together so that he was no longer, there was so much vomit left in him because the reason he lost so much was he wasn't able to process the food that he did eat. And so his body was using just muscles. So all this food was unprocessed within his body because it was fused together, and then nothing was being taken in, and it just shocked them. The sad thing is that they had planned on, because they were still doing all their tests, they had planned on the only way to discover a perforated ulcer is either through surgery or through when you put the camera down you, but it's pretty invasive, or an autopsy. And they were planning on putting the camera down him the day that he died, or the day that he expired. And it was like one day too late. And he was alone in the hospital. No one saw him. They found him in his wheelchair in the kitchen, covered in his vomit. They kept him, they revived him, kept him alive for long enough for my daughter and I to hold his hand and be with him and hope that he would come out of it. But they didn't know what was wrong with him, so they didn't know how to help. It was a day too late, and it seems to be his life story. The last 6 months with everyone was too late to keep up with him. Just constantly trying to keep up with him when we could.
Do you know what caused the ulcers? Do they have a theory for it?
One of the possibilities is the medication for his knees. And he did take a lot. I saw the bottle, and it was only like a third missing. And we knew he only took it in emergencies, but because the thing is he was already, as it says, and the doctors too, they're like, he had the best combination, which made him the worst patient for ulcers. He was biologically extremely healthy. His diet was healthy. His biology was healthy, and his lifestyle was healthy. What are the three? Anyways, genetics. His genetics he was very healthy. So he was tall, thin, and by our standards nowadays, an exceptionally fit, well young man, which made him extremely vulnerable and susceptible to the effects of ulcers. Many of us can have them, and it doesn't, we can have discomfort and so on. But because he didn't have any additional fat, he had no reserves. And because he had no reserves, he was a ripe candidate for perforating ulcers. And they didn't have any fat to go through to begin with before they could discover them. They just were able to attack all the other parts of his body because they didn't have the layer that many rest of us have to go through. So his health ended up being detrimental to him in another ironic twist.
have you been able to make any sense of what happened? Have you been able to find something for yourselves that you have learned from this?
I learned each day with those I love, and having those I love really is a gift. Not to be taken for granted.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for listening.
It was really moving. I found it really personal. And you both seem like you have still so much to give and you have so much strength. It's an impossible situation to navigate, but you haven't given up. And I think that's a testament to how incredibly strong you both are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so, so much. And keep sharing this story because a lot of people can learn a lot from it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.